In order to access the ball joints, we'll need to remove the wheel and tire assembly. So before we do that, we're going to want to crack the lug nuts, then we can jack the vehicle up. Now that we have the wheel and tire assembly removed, we have access to where we're working. So next step is to remove the brake calipers. And before we do that, we're going to pop the hood and loosen the top on the brake fluid reservoir. Using a 12-point half-inch socket, go ahead and remove the brake caliper bolts. Once you've removed the brake calipers, hang them out of the way by using a piece of wire to tie them to the lower front control arms. With the brake caliper now out of the way, we can remove the brake rotor, set it aside, which gives us access to the hub and splash guard assembly. Now we'll remove the 3 bolts that secure the hub to the steering knuckle. As these bolts get torqued to over 100 foot-pounds, sometimes we'll need to use a breaker bar to get them loose, which it looks like we will here. Now with the 3 hub bolts removed, we can remove the nut that secures the axle shaft to the hub assembly. To do that, we'll first have to remove the old cotter pin, and then the retaining washer and cap. So to remove the cotter pin, we'll just use a large screwdriver. We can get the ends twisted to the side. And then you can get them a little bit straighter with pliers. You can usually pound it through with a hammer from there. Just put the tip of your needle nose pliers on the end and then tap the side of the pliers. That'll pull it right out. Then remove the cap and the spring washer. So now we're going to use a 36mm socket to remove the axle to hub nut and a good long breaker bar. If you don't have a breaker bar handy, a good tip is to just use the end of your jack handle. After you remove the axle nut, there's one more washer underneath it. Got to wiggle out, and it can be impossible if there's a video camera on. There we go. Alright, set the washer aside. Grab the hub assembly, it's pretty heavy. Put your thumb on the end of the axle shaft, push with your thumb and pull the hub off, along with the splash guard assembly for the brake rotor. Set those aside. We now have access to pull the axle shaft out of the differential. Now grab a hold of the axle shaft and pull it straight out. Next, we're going to remove the tie rod end that is secured to the front of the steering knuckle. And in order to do that, we're going to need to remove the castellated nut and, of course, the cotter pin that holds the castellated nut in place so that it doesn't loosen up. And that's a 3/4 inch. So we'll loosen that just a little bit. When we're done, we'll tighten that to 55 foot-pounds. Don't take it all the way off. Now we're going to use a tie rod end removal tool. Insert the forked part of the jaws underneath the steering knuckle, and the singular part goes over the top of the nut. And we're going to tighten that down. Be real careful you don't rupture the boot on the tie rod end. Tighten that down. The lower jaws are held in place by the steering knuckle itself, whereas the upper jaw clamps down, forcing the bolt that attaches to the ball of the tie rod end will force it through the steering knuckle. Got to get it pretty tight. And if you usually a quick shot or two with a hammer, come right off. Sometimes it'll pop when you're not ready for it. So just to be safe, I'm going to put a pair of safety glasses on right now. And just give it a wrap. Off it goes. And you can continue removing that castellated nut from the top. You can move your tie rod forward and out of the way. Now with everything removed, we have full access to the steering knuckle and both the lower ball joint and the upper ball joint. So what your ball joints actually do is they allow the steering knuckle to rotate when you turn the steering wheel via the steering linkage on the C channel of the axle assembly itself. So now we're going to use a 28mm socket to remove the lower ball joint castellated nut. For the upper castellated nut, we're going to use a 22mm 6-point socket. Actually, this is a 12-point socket. So in order to press out the ball joints now, we need to remove the steering knuckle itself. So to do that, we're going to reinstall one of the castellated nuts just a little bit, just enough to catch it so it doesn't go flying. And we're going to use a 3-pound sledge to pound on the shoulder on the upper part of it. That will knock it out. There we are. Now I can unscrew that bottom castellated nut. Hang on to that steering knuckle, it's heavy. So for Jeep XJ Cherokees, ZJ Grand Cherokees, as well as TJ and LJ Wranglers, I'm going to use the Dana Spicer joint kit. That is part number 706944X. One of the secrets to making this job a lot easier is having the right tools. Now, I got lucky. I have a friend who has a great ball joint set, probably the best you can get. This is a Snap-on Master Ball Joint and U-joint set. So, whatever you're going to do, beg, borrow, or buy if you have to, a really good ball joint set. So before I install the ball joint press and removal tools, I removed the grease cover for the upper ball joint. That allows us to get a much more linear and therefore efficient connection between the ball joint press and the ball joint itself. Next, I did a pressing sleeve and then another cylinder above that captures the ball joint as we push it out, and then a flat piece on top against which I can push with the ball joint press. Now we're just going to tighten the ball joint press until we slowly push the ball joint out. Probably going to need a breaker bar. As we continue to tighten it, you can see the ball joint begin to be pressed up through the C channel of the axle. And there we are. Loosen that up so you can see. We've now pressed out the old ball joint. So in setting up the press to press out the lower ball joint, you actually put the threaded part of the press through the hole in the upper part of the axle C, from which we'd actually removed the upper ball joint and pressed directly onto the back of the lower ball joint. And then I have the same receiver I use on the upper one to catch it, so to speak, underneath. Let's tighten that down. Just push it right through the bottom of that C and into the receiver. And there's our old lower ball joint. So let's clean out the areas where we're going to install the new ball joints. That way they go in clean and don't put any dirt or grime in with them that could slowly abrade over the years. Plus, if they're clean, it's a lot easier to press them in straight. And that's really important. So I've now taken the new ball joint and gently put it underneath the lower C to install it. So what I chose is a cap that fits perfectly parallel to the bottom of the axle C. And above that, since the bottom of the C is actually tapered, it's wider towards the midline of the vehicle than it is towards the outside of the vehicle. For the receiver, I used a piece that's also tapered so that it matches that. That way we're pushing in a perfectly straight line. That's very important. Otherwise they'll install the ball joint crooked and it probably will not seat fully. Keep an eye on it to make sure that it's being installed perfectly straight. You want to make absolutely certain that the shoulder of the ball joint is fully seated. So we're going to use a breaker bar for one last turn. Fully seated all the way around. That's good. Now we're going to install the upper ball joint by pressing it down into the top of the axle C. So I need to choose our receiver and our pressing bushings. And again, since the axle C is tapered, I'm going to need to use a tapered receiver as well. Have the thickest part of the receiver sleeve facing you. There we go. And there's a sleeve that I can push straight down with. So let's get that all clamped up. Make sure everything's centered just right. You may need to tap it a bit with a hammer. Looks like everything is straight. So let's go ahead and push that in. Got to make sure there's no gap down there. So gotta keep tightening. See, there's a small gap. So got to get that last millimeter down. One more turn. Now with the upper and lower ball joint installed, it's time to install the steering knuckle. So that gets pressed on from the bottom. And we're going to use new hardware, which should come with your ball joints. Here's for the upper joint, and then one for the lower joint. The lower one will be tightened to 80 foot-pounds of torque. The upper will be tightened to 75 foot-pounds of torque. If after reinstalling the new castellated nuts on the ball joint studs, there is not enough room to insert the cotter pin, then it is permissible to tighten them further until the holes line up. Now that we have our steering knuckle reinstalled, we can reinsert the axle shaft. So to do that, first make sure it's wiped clean. Just use a clean paper towel for that. Just wipe straight towards the end of the spline to make sure there's no dirt on the end of it. And there's a little trick to this. Grab a large screwdriver and use it to partially support the axle shaft so that the end of it doesn't drag on the dirty inside of the axle tube. I want to keep this clean so we don't contaminate our differentials. And gently insert it. You'll feel the splines engage. Don't force it. Otherwise you can ruin your inner axle seals. Next, we're going to reinstall our splash guard. If you look at the splash guard, there's a small notch. That notch faces forward. And if it's a pipe plate, the bottom of it, like that, goes towards you. So line that notch just underneath the most forward part of the steering knuckle. That's what clearances the tie rod and ball joint. And we install our hub over that. And then gently mate up the splines of the hub on the axle shaft assembly. Don't force it, you'll feel it engage. There it is. And then slowly align the holes of the hub with the holes on the brake shield. There are 3 bolts that we need to install. One on top, and then one on the forward and aft sides as well. Next we'll reinstall the washer and then the axle nut. This one goes on tight, 175 foot-pounds. And then on top of that, our spring washer, and then our retaining cap. Use a fresh cotter pin for that. Now we'll install the tie rod end for the driver's side. This one goes to 55 foot-pounds. Don't forget to install a new cotter pin. Let's put some grease in our new upper ball joint. This is NLGI number 2 waterproof grease. put the brake rotor back on. Careful not to touch the braking surface. You don't want any of the oils from your hands to contaminate your brakes. There we go. And then now we'll do the brake caliper. And then our caliper mounting bolts. Time to put the wheel and tire back on and tighten all the lug nuts to 95 foot-pounds. Congratulations, you're all done. You have successfully changed the ball joints in your Jeep vehicle.